The snow fell in quiet sheets outside the fluorescent glow of the Quick Mart, a small 24-hour convenience store tucked on the edge of a sleepy Ohio town. The wind howled, rattling the glass door, as a man hunched against the cold lingered just beyond the parking lot's dim light. His silhouette was barely visible through the frost-coated window, but his shivering form caught the eye of Ellen, the night shift cashier. Her hands paused over the register, her breath catching as she watched him pull a tattered coat tighter around his frame. His fingers, bare and red from the biting cold, clutched at the fabric like a lifeline. What kind of life leaves a man to freeze alone in the dark? And for a moment, silence filled the store, broken only by the hum of the cooler in the back. Ellen was 62, with silver hair tucked into a loose bun and eyes that carried the weight of too many years behind a counter. She'd worked at Quick Mart for a decade, ever since her husband passed and the house grew too quiet. The store was her rhythm, now scanning barcodes, restocking shelves, and offering small smiles to the late-night regulars. But tonight, the man outside stirred something deeper, something that made her chest ache with a familiar pang of loss. She glanced at the clock, 2 a.m. The store was empty, save for the soft buzz of the radio playing an old country tune. She stepped closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. The man was still there, his head bowed, his hands stuffed into his pockets as if they could find warmth that wasn't there. She turned back to the counter, her fingers brushing against a pair of cheap wool gloves on a display rack, $4.99. Black, one size fits all. They were nothing special, but they were warm. She hesitated, her hand hovering. Why would she care? She didn't know him. He wasn't her responsibility. Yet the image of those bare, trembling hands lingered. She grabbed the gloves, her heart thudding, and slipped them into her apron pocket. The bell above the door jingled as she pushed it open, the cold air hitting her like a slap. "Hey," she called softly, her voice nearly lost in the wind. The man startled, his eyes wide and wary, like a deer caught in headlights. He was older than she'd thought, maybe 60, with a grizzled beard and lines etched deep into his face. "You okay out here?" she asked, stepping closer. He didn't answer, just nodded, his breath visible in the frigid air. I noticed your hands," Ellen said, her voice trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of reaching out. "It's too cold to be out here without gloves." She pulled the pair from her pocket, holding them out like an offering. His eyes flickered to the gloves, then back to her, suspicion softening into something else, something raw and unguarded. "Why?" he rasped, his voice rough, like it hadn't been used in days. Why would a stranger care when even the world seemed to have forgotten him? Ellen swallowed, her throat tight. "Because no one should be this cold," she said simply. He hesitated, then took the gloves, his fingers brushing hers. They were icy, and she fought the urge to flinch. He slipped them on, flexing his hands as if testing their reality. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible over the wind. Ellen didn't know his name, but she learned it over the next few nights. His name was Tom, and he came back to the Quick Mart's parking lot each evening, lingering near the warmth of the store's light. She started small, offering him a cup of coffee from the machine, black and steaming, when no one was around. "It's on the house," she'd say, waving off his protests. He'd sit on the curb, cradling the cup, and they'd talk. At first, it was just small things, the weather, the way the town used to be before the factory closed. But slowly, the conversations grew. Tom spoke of a life that had unraveled, a job lost, a wife gone too soon, a daughter who hadn't called in years. Ellen shared her own quiet grief, the way her husband's laugh still echoed in her dreams. "You ever feel like kindness finds you when you need it most?" She wondered silently one night, watching Tom sip his coffee, his gloves now worn but still holding strong. One evening, as the snow dusted the pavement, Tom lingered longer than usual. Ellen noticed his coat was thinner than before, the seams fraying at the shoulders. She didn't ask why he didn't need to explain. Instead, she slipped into the back room during her break and pulled a spare blanket from the employee closet, one she'd kept for late shifts when the heater failed. She folded it neatly and brought it out to him. "It's not much," she said, her voice soft, "but it'll help." Tom's eyes glistened, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. He clutched the blanket to his chest, his breath hitching. "You don't know what this means," he said finally, his voice breaking. Ellen smiled, her own eyes stinging. "Have you ever given someone a piece of warmth and felt it warm you too?" The nights blurred into weeks, and Ellen began to look forward to Tom's quiet presence. He'd tell her stories, small ones, about fishing with his daughter when she was little, or the way his wife used to hum while cooking Thanksgiving dinner. Ellen shared her own memories, like the time she and her husband danced in the kitchen to an old radio song. Their talks were simple, but they built a bridge between two lonely souls. One night, Tom arrived with a small, crumpled envelope in his gloved hands. "Found this today," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. He handed it to her, and inside was a photo of a young girl, maybe 8, grinning beside a man who looked like a younger Tom. "My daughter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Haven't seen her in 15 years. Ellen's heart clenched. She touched his arm, a gesture so small yet so heavy. Could a single moment of kindness bring someone back to who they used to be? The turning point came on a night when the snow fell heavier than usual, blanketing the town in silence. Ellen was closing up, the clock ticking past midnight, when she noticed Tom wasn't in his usual spot. Panic flickered in her chest. She locked the register, grabbed her coat, and stepped outside, calling his name into the wind. She found him a block away, slumped against a bus stop bench, his blanket wrapped tight around him. His face was pale, his breath shallow. "Tom!" she cried, kneeling beside him. His eyes fluttered open, and he managed a weak smile. "Just tired," he mumbled. But Ellen knew better. She called 911, her hands trembling as she held his gloved hand, whispering, "Stay with me, okay? You're not alone." The ambulance arrived, its lights cutting through the snow, and Ellen rode with him to the hospital, her heart pounding. Could this moment, this one act, rewrite everything they believed about life and loss? At the hospital, the doctors said Tom had pneumonia, caught early enough to treat. Ellen stayed by his side, her shift long forgotten. She didn't know why she stayed, only that she couldn't leave. Over the next few days, she visited, bringing him coffee in a thermos and stories to keep him company. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the hospital window, Tom reached for her hand. "You gave me more than gloves," he said, his voice stronger now. "You gave me a reason to try again." Ellen's throat tightened, and she squeezed his hand. Later that week, Tom showed her a letter he'd written addressed to his daughter, Emily. He hadn't sent it yet, but the words were there, spilling out years of regret and hope. Ellen helped him find an address through an old friend at the library, and together, they mailed it. It was a small step, but it felt like a mountain climbed. Weeks later, spring crept into the Ohio town, melting the snow and coaxing green from the earth. Tom didn't linger in the Quick Mart parking lot anymore. He'd found a shelter program, then a small apartment and a part-time job at a hardware store. But he still stopped by the store, not as a shadow in the cold, but as a friend. One evening, he walked in with a nervous smile and a letter in his hand. "Emily wrote back," he said, his voice trembling with joy. He didn't read it aloud, but Ellen saw the light in his eyes, the kind that comes from a second chance. They sat on the curb together, sharing coffee, the air warm with the promise of new beginnings. What if your smallest kindness became someone else's reason to keep going? Ellen never forgot those cold nights, the gloves, the blanket, the way a simple gesture could ripple outward. She still worked the night shift, still smiled at her regulars, but something had shifted inside her. The ache of her own loss felt softer now, warmed by the knowledge that she'd made a difference. Tom's daughter visited that summer, and Ellen met her, a woman with her father's eyes and a smile that carried years of forgiveness. The three of them sat at the diner across the street, laughing over pie, the kind of moment that feels like a gift you didn't know you needed. And as Ellen watched them, she realized that kindness wasn't just a moment, it was a thread, weaving people together, mending what was broken. Has kindness ever changed your life? Tell us in the comments. Your story might inspire our next video. Subscribe to The Kind Story for weekly real-life inspiration and explore our playlist of emotional kindness stories. This story is a work of fiction or dramatized for entertainment purposes. While it may be inspired by real human emotions and events, all characters, names, and situations are either entirely fictional or modified for storytelling. This content fully complies with YouTube's community guidelines and is intended to inspire, not mislead.